New 72 Radio, the voice, views, and visions of the collective.
Hello, welcome to the long-awaited next episode of The Voice of Odin. It's been a while, taking me a while to get grounded back in the UK, but I'm settled now and ready to crack on. So, for those of you who've never listened to this before, I'm going to read a story from the Teutonic Tales, more from a Saxon side than a Norse side, a not much older story, but it's just going to give you a basis of who Odin and the Norse gods are. So the first one I'm starting with is Odin. Odin, Wotan, or Woden, was the highest and holiest of all the gods of the northern races. He was the all-pervading spirit of the universe, the personification of the air, the god of universal wisdom and victory, and the leader and protector of princes and heroes. As all the gods were supposed to be descended from him, he was also surnamed All-Father, and as eldest and chief among them, he occupied the highest seat in Asgard, known by the name as Hilsgarth. This chair was not only an exalted throne, but also a mighty watchtower, from whence he could overlook the world and see at a glance all that was happening among the gods, the giants, the elves, the dwarves, and men. From the hall, from the hall of heaven he rode away to Hilsgarth and sate upon his throne. And far from heaven he turned his shining orbs to look on Midgard and the earth and on men. None but Odin and his wife, the Queen Frigga, were privileged to use this seat, and when they occupied it, they generally gazed towards the south and west, the goal of all the hopes and excursions of the northern nations. Odin was generally represented as a tall, vigorous man, about 50 years of age, either with dark curling hair or long grey beard and bald head. That sounds a bit like me, that's quite weird. He was clad in a suit of grey with a blue hood, and his muscular body was enveloped in a wide blue mantle flecked with grey, an emblem of the sky with the fleecy clouds. In his hand, Odin generally carried an infallible spear called Gungnir, which was so sacred that an oath sworn upon its point could never be broken. And on his fingers or arm he wore the marvellous ring Draupnir, the emblem of fruitfulness, precious beyond compare. When seated upon his throne or armed for the fray, to mingle in which he would often descend to earth, Odin wore the eagle's helm. But when he wandered peacefully about the earth in human guise to see what men were doing, he generally donned a broad-brimmed hat, drawn low over his forehead to conceal the fact he only possessed one eye. Two ravens, Hugin, thought, and Munin, memory, perched upon his shoulders as he sat upon his throne. And these he sent out into the wild world every day, anxiously watching for their return at nightfall, when they whispered into his ears news of all they had seen and heard. Thus he was kept well informed about everything that was happening on earth. Hugin and Munin fly each day over the spacious earth. I fear Hugin that he may not come back, yet more anxious am I for Munin. At his feet crouched two wolves or hunting hounds, Geri and Freki, animals which were therefore considered sacred to him and of good omen if met by the way. Odin always fed these wolves with his own hands, from meat set before him. He required no food at all for himself, and seldom tasted anything except sacred mead. Geri and Freki, the war-wont sates, the triumphant sire of hosts, but on wine only, the fane in arms, did Odin ever live. When seated in state upon his throne, Odin rested his feet upon a footstool of gold, the work of the gods, all of whose furniture and utensils were either fashioned by this precious metal or from silver. Besides the magnificent hall in Gladheim, where stood the 12 seats occupied by the gods when they met for council, and Valaskalf, where his throne, Hilskalf, was placed, Odin had a third palace in Asgard, situated in the midst of the marvellous grove Glacier, whose shimmering leaves were all red gold. Valhalla, this place was called, the Hall of the Chosen Slain. It had 540 doors, wide enough to allow the passage of 800 warriors abreast, and above the principal gate were a boar's head and an eagle whose piercing glance penetrated to the far corners of the world. The walls of this marvellous building were fashioned of glittering spears, so highly polished that they illuminated the hall. The roof was of golden shields, and the benches were decorated with fine armour, the god's gift to his guests. Here long tables afforded ample accommodation for the Einherjar, warriors fallen in battle, who were specially favoured by Odin. Easily to known is, by those who Woden come, a mansion by its aspect, its roof with spears is laid, its hall with shields is decked, with corselets are its benches strewed. The ancient northern nations, who deemed warfare the most honourable of occupations and considered courage the greatest virtue, worshipped Odin principally as their god of battle and victory. They believed that whenever a fight was impending, he sent out his special attendants, the shield or battle maidens, the wish maidens. These were called Valkyrs, chosen of the slain, who selected from the dead warriors one half of their number, whom they bore on their fleet steeds over the quivering rainbow bridge, Bifrost, into Valhalla. Welcomed by Odin's sons, Hermod and Bragi, the heroes were conducted to the foot of Odin's throne, where they received the praise due their valour. When some special favourite of the god was thus brought into Asgard, Valfather, father of the slain, as Odin was called when he resided over the warriors, would sometimes rise from his throne and in person bid him welcome at the great entrance gate. Besides the glory of such distinction and the enjoyment of Odin's beloved present day after day, other more material pleasures awaited the warriors in Valhalla. Generous entertainment was provided for them at the long tables, where the beautiful white-armed virgins, the Valkyrs, having laid aside their armour and clad themselves in pure white robes, waited upon them with assiduous attention. These maidens, 9 in number according to some authorities, brought the heroes great horns full of delicious mead, and set before them huge portion of boar's flesh, of which they feasted heartily. The usual drink was beer or ale, but our ancestors fancied this beverage too coarse for the heavenly sphere. They therefore imagined that Volfather kept his table liberally supplied with mead, or hydromel, which was daily furnished in great abundance by the she-goat Hedron, who continually browsed at the tender leaves and twigs on Lirad, Yggdrasil's utmost branch. Rash war and perilous battle their delight, and immature and red with glorious wounds. Unpeaceful death their choice, deriving thence. A right to feast and drain immortal bowls in Odin's hall, whose blazing roof resounds the genial uproar of those shades who fell in desperate fight and by some brave attempt. The meat upon which the Einherjar feasted was the flesh of a divine boar, Seihraminir, a famous beast daily slain by the cook, Andhrimnir, and boiled in a great cauldron, Eldhrimnir. But although Odin's guests had true northern appetites and gorged themselves to the full, there were always plenty of meat for all. Moreover, the supply was exhaustless, for the boar always came to life again the next day and for the next meal. This miraculous renewal of supplies in the larder was not the only wonderful occurrence in Valhalla, for it is related that the warriors, having eaten and drunk so satially, always called for their weapons, armed themselves, and rode out into great courtyards, where they fought against one another, repeating the feats of arms for which they were famed of an earth, and recklessly dealing terrible wounds, which, however, were miraculously and completely healed as soon as the dinner horn was sounded. I'm going to read this poem as well. All the chosen guests of Odin daily ply the trade of war, From the fields of festal fight, swift they ride in gleaming arms, and gaily at the board of gods quaff the cup of sparkling ale, and eat Serimnir's vaulted flesh. That's from a poem called Voltnir's Mal. So whole and happy at the sound of the horn, and bearing one another no grudge for cruel thrusts given and received, the Einherjar would gladly back to Valhalla to renew their feast in Odin's beloved presence, with the white-armed Valkyries, with flying hair, glided gracefully about, constantly filling their horns or their favourite drinking vessels. The skulls of their enemies, while the scourge sang of war and the stirring Viking forays. And all day long they were backed and hewed, midst dust and groans and leapt off blood. But all at night returned to Odin's hall, woundless and fresh. Such is their lot in heaven. So that's the first one I'm going to read. Now I'm going to go to a different book, and this is the Poetic Eddas. And this is the List of Rig. The List of Rig tells how the god Heimdall set out to create the structures of human society. He calls at 3 houses, observes the way of life there, dull and peasant-like, skilled and practical, noble and courtly, respectively, and receives the hospitality of the couple of each house. Heimdall, or Rig, sleeps between them in their bed for 3 nights. Later, a child is born to the parents. To the first couple, thrall, the lowest labourer. To the second couple, farmer. To the third, lord. These are the progenitors of each class. Each marry a suitable wife and producing a bevy of children with symbolic names to continue the line. The poem is incomplete, but the line of lords seems to culminate at the birth of the king, the youngest son. Where the poem breaks off, the boy destined for kingship is about to embark on a conquering of other territories at the urging of a wise bird. The poem is preserved in one of the manuscripts of Snorri's Edda, and this is from a thing called the Codex Worminus. So I'm going to read the first bit. People say in old stories that one of the Aesir, the one called Heimdall, went on a journey, and as he went along the seashore, somewhere he came to a household, and he called himself Rig. And this is his poem. Long ago, they say, along the green paths, a powerful, mature, and knowledgeable god went walking, mighty and vigorous, Rig stepping along. Then he walked on in the middle of the road. He came to a house. The door was in mortise. In he stepped. There was a fire on the floor. A couple sat there, grey-haired by the hearth. Great-grandfather and great-grandmother in an old-fashioned headdress. Rig was able to give them some advice. Then he sat in the middle of the bench, with a couple of the household on either side. Then great-grandmother brought a coarse loaf, thick and heavy, stuffed with husks, and set it among the bowls. Was broth in a jug. She put it in the table. Calf had been boiled in it, the best of delicacies. He got up from there and made ready to sleep. Rig was able to give them some advice. Then he lay in the middle of the bed, with the couple of the household on either side. There he was for 3 nights together. Then away in the middle of the path, 9 months passed after that. Great-grandmother had a baby, sprinkled him with water. Dark-skinned, they called him, Thrall. He began to grow and to thrive well. On his hands were wrinkled skin, knotted knuckles, thick fingers. He had an ugly face, a crooked back, and long heels. Then he began to use his strength to bind base rope to make bundles. Brushwood he carried home the whole day long. Then there came to the farm a bandy-legged girl. She had mud on her soles, her arms were sunburned, her nose bent downwards. Her name was Thrall Girl. Then she sat in the middle of the bench, with the son of the house set next to her. They talked and they whispered, they went to bed, Thrall and Thrall Girl, day after day. Children they had, they lived together and were happy. I think they were called Noisy and Cowshed Boy, Stout and Horsefly, Shagger and Smelly, Stumper, Fatty, Sluggard and Greyish, Low Bent and Long Legs. These children built the fences, to put dung on the fields, looked after pigs, herded the goats, and dug the turf. Their daughters were Stumpy and Dumpy, bulgy calves and ash nose, Rackety and Bondwoman, Great Gabbler, Rackety Clothes and Crane Legs. From them are descended all the race of Thorls. Rig went along the straight paths. He came to a hall. The door was on the latch. In he stepped. A fire was on the floor. A couple sat there. They kept on working. The man was carving wood for a loom beam. His beard was trimmed, his hair above his brows, his shirt close-fitting. A chest was on the floor. There sat a woman, spinning with a distaff, stretching out her arms, ready to make cloth. A curved cap was on her brow, a shirt on her breast, a handkerchief around her neck, brooches at her shoulders. Grandmother and grandfather owned this house. Rig was able to give them advice. He rose from the table, made ready to sleep. Then he lay in the middle of the bed, with the couple of the household on either side. There he was for 3 nights together. Then away he went in the middle of the path. 9 months passed after that. Grandmother had a baby, sprinkled him with water. They called him Farmer. The woman swaddled him. Red-haired and rosy, with lively eyes. He began to grow and to thrive well. He tamed oxen, made a plough. He built houses and threw up barns, made carts and drove the plough. Then they drove home, the woman with keys at her belt, in a goatskin kirtle. She was married to Farmer. Daughter-in-law she was called. She sat down in a bridal veil. A couple settled down, exchanged rings, spread their bed coverlets, made a household together. Children they had. They lived long together and were very happy. Called Man and Tough Guy, Landlord and Thane, Smith and Broad, Yeoman and Boundbeard, Dweller and Bodie, Smoothbeard and Fellow. And these were called by other names: Lass and Bride, Lady and Maiden, Damsel and Dame, Miss and Mistress, Shy Girl and Sparky Girl. From them descend all the race of farmers. Rig went along the straight paths. He came to a hall. The doors looked south. The door was half opened. The door ring was in the mortice. In he stepped. The floor was strewn with straw. A couple sat, gazing into one another's eyes. Father and mother, playing with their fingers. There sat the householder and twisted bowstrings, strung the elm bow, put shafts on arrows, and the lady of the house was admiring her arms, stroking the linen, smoothing the sleeves. She straightened her headdress. There was a coin pendant at her breast, a trailing dress and a blue-coloured blouse. Her brow was brighter, her breast was more shining. Her neck was whiter than pure, fresh fallen snow. Rig was able to give them some advice. Then he sat in the middle of the bench, with a couple of the household on either side. Then mother took a patterned cloth, a white one, of linen, covered the table. Then she brought fine, fine loaves, white ones of wheat flour, and laid them on the cloth. She brought in full dishes, chased with silver, and put them on the table. Dark and light pork meat and roasted birds. Wine was in a flagon ornamented with goblets. They drank and they conversed. The day drew to a close. Rig was able to give them some advice. Up he rose, made ready the bed. Then he was for 3 nights together with them. Then away he went in the middle of the path. And 9 months passed after that. Mother gave birth to a boy and wrapped him in silk. They sprinkled him with water and they named him Lord. Blonde was his hair, bright was his cheeks, piercing were his eyes like the young snakes. Lord grew up there on the benches. He began to swing linden shields, to fit bowstrings, to bend the elm bow, to put shafts on arrows, to hurl a javelin, to brandish Frankish spears, to ride horses, to urge on hounds, to wield swords and practice swimming. Then out of the thicket came Rig walking. Rig came walking. He taught this boy runes, gave him his own name, said he had a son. He told him to take possession of the ancestral plains. ancestral plains, long established settlements. Then he rode from there to the dark wood, over frost-covered mountains, until he came to a hall. He brandished the shafted spear, swung his linden shield, made his horse gallop, and wielded his sword. He wakened the war. He began to redden the plain. He began to fall dead men. He fought to gain lands. Then he alone ruled 18 settlements. He started to share the wealth offered to everyone, treasures and precious things, slim-ribbed horses. He scattered arm rings. He hacked up arm rings and shared them equally. Messengers travelled over the dewy roads, came to the hall of where a chieftain lived. He met there a slender-fingered girl, radiant and wise. They called her Erna. They asked for her hand, and home they drove her, married her to Lord. She walked under the bridal vow. They lived together and were happy, increased the family, enjoyed their life. Boy was the eldest, child was the second, baby and noble, heir and offspring, descendant and relative. They learned to play games. Sonny and lad, swimming and checkers. Kinsman one was called, kin was the youngest. Those born of Lord grew up there. They tamed horses. They bound rims to shields. They smoothed arrow shafts, and they brandished as spears. But young kin knew runes, life runes and lifespan runes, and he knew how to help people, to deaden sword blades, to quieten the ocean. He learned the speech of birds. He learned how to quench fires, to pacify waters, to make sorrows disappear. He had the strength and vigour of 8 men. He contended in rune wisdom with Lord and with Rig. He played more tricks, knew more than he did. He gained and he got the right to be called Rig and to deploy runes himself. Young kin rode through woods and thickets. He let fly the bird bolt, charmed the birds. Then a crow said, it sat alone on a branch, why, young kin, are you charming birds? Rather you could be riding horses, laying low another army. Dan and Dampney own splendid halls, a better patrimony than you possess. They know very well how to sail the ships, to test the sword blade, to rip open wounds. And the rest of that story is lost. Look and see how it goes. It was the sons of Hemdall or Rig. He produced the Thors, he produced the farmers. Then when it comes to lordship, you start seeing the dynasty of how they took over and the magic of the runes, how they're involved in each and every story. This next story is called The Song of Hyndla. I'll read you the introduction. It's about Freya. Now, it's another goddess. She's the queen of the Vanir, the queen of the elves and the fairies. She's the goddess of magic, abundance, joy, beauty, love, and sex. All the powers of women, and she is the chief goddess and chief leader of the Valkyries, who we spoke about in the earlier story. So this is the Song of Hyndla. In 2 poems into one, the main story concerns the goddess Freya, who is anxious to assist her protege, Otter, in gaining his inheritance against the competing charms of someone called Angatyr. In order to do this, Otter needs to know all about his ancestry. Freya disguises him as a pig with golden bristles, Battlehog, on which she rides and brings him to the giantess Hyndla, to elicit the information she seeks. Freya tries to flatter the giantess, calling her sister. After some initial sparring, the giantess settles down to recount the ancestors of Otter, although she refuses to ride to Valhall with Freya. At verse 29, an interpolation, often known as the short prophecy of the seeress, the Vospa, begins, listing the Aesir and referring very unclearly to one who is greater than all, who will come after Odin, conceivably an allusion to Christ. The poem concludes with further bickering between the goddess and the giantess. Little is known about most of the figures mentioned in the Song of Hyndla. Where more information exists is given in the notes. The poem is preserved only in the Flateyjarbók, a large 14th century Icelandic codex. And these stories were taken as fireside stories and written down by Christian monks. So you have to leave some sort of a bit of interpretation of where they bring in, add a sort of spice of life themselves to make the story fit what they believe. And this is the beginning of the Song of Hyndla, told about Otter the simpleton. Wake up, girl of girls, wake up, my friend. Hyndla, sister, who lives in the rock cave. Now it's the darkness of darknesses. We two shall ride to Valhalla, to the sacred sanctuary. Let's ask Odin, Lord of hosts, to be kindly. He gives us and pays us out goals that we're deserving. He gave Hermod a helmet and a corselet, and to Sigmund a sword that he kept. He gives victory to some riches, eloquence to many, and common sense to the living. He gives following winds to sailors. He turns phrase to poets. He gives manliness to many a fighter. She will sacrifice to Thor. She will ask for this, that he should always behave staunchly towards you, though he doesn't much care for giant women. So this Hyndla is a giant woman and is scared to go to Valhalla because of Thor. Now take one of your wolves out of the stable. Let him race beside my boar. Your boar is slow at treading the gods' paths. I don't want to override my excellent steed. You're deceitful, Freya, when you test me so, when you look at us that way. When you're talking about taking your man to the road to Valhalla, young Otter, son of Instein. You're confused, Hyndla. I think you're dreaming. When you say my man is on the road to Valhalla, there where my boar is glowing with his golden bristles, Battlehog, whom those skillful ones Drain and Dabby and Dane, two dwarves made for me. Let's contend with our saddles. We should sit down and talk of princes' lineages, about those men who are descended from the gods. They have wagered foreign gold, young Otter and Antigone. It is vital to help, so the young warrior should get his paternal inheritance after his kinsman's death. He's made a sanctuary for me, faced with stone. Now that stone has turned to glass. He's reddened it with fresh ox blood. Otter has always trusted in the goddesses. Now let the ancient kinsman be counted up, the men's lineage be declared. Who he is of the Scoldings, and who are the Skilfings, who are the Oddlings and the Ilflings, who is born of land downing stock, who is born of lordly stock, the greatest choice of men on the face of the earth. You, Otter, were son of Instein, and Instein of Alf the Old, Alf of Ulf, Ulf of Safri, Safri from Svan the Red. Your father had a mother adorned with rings. Cledis the princess, I think she was called. Frode was your father, and Freot her mother. All the line is thought to be most superior. Ali was previously the mighty of men. Halfdan before was the highest among the Scyldings. Famous were the battles which his excellent men fought, his deeds known far and wide under heaven's vault. He strengthened himself with Eamon, best of men, and he killed Sigtig, the chill sword wedges. He married Anveg, best of women, and they raised 18 sons. From then come the Scyldings, from then the Skilfings, from then the Oddlings, and from then the Iflings, and the Inglings. From then the land-owning stock, from them the lordly stock, the greatest choice of men on the face of the earth. All these are your kin, Otter, Otter the simpleton. Hilligun was her mother, child of Sava and the Sea King. All these are your kin, Otter the simpleton, and it's important you know that. Do you want to know more? Lineage was very important in the Norse and Viking heritage and the Saxon. Most families could recite 20 or 30 generations back. We have lost that ability. We're lucky if we can get our great-grandparents. And in the Norse tradition, it's really important that you remember those who came before. I'll read on just a little bit more, and then we'll call it a day for your first episode. Any questions, please email me. I'm happy to answer anything on the Norse traditions and the Saxon traditions and the sagas of our people, my people. Dag married Thora, mother of tough men. The best champions were born into that lineage. Fragmar and Geard and both the Frekkies, Am and Isena, Alf the Old. It's important that you know this. Do you want to know more? Ketil, their friend, was called Klip's heir. He was your mother's maternal grandfather. There Frodi came before Carrie. Alf was born as the eldest son. Nana came next, Nokvi's daughter. Her son was your father's in-law. Forgotten is that in-law bond. I can recite further. I knew both Brod and Horvir. All these are your kin, Otter the simpleton. Isolf and Azolf, sons of Olmund, and Skurhild and Skekil, his daughter. You must count them among the many warriors. All these are your kin, Otter the simpleton. Gunnar the bulwark, Grim the ploughmaker, Thorir shield, iron shield, Ulf the gaper, Boy and Brammy, Barry and Rifnir, Tind and Tarfing and the two headings. All these are your kin, Otter the simpleton. Annie and Omi, who were both born sons of Arngrim and Ifira. The din of all kinds of berserker wickedness on land and on sea did they spill. All these are your kin, Otter the simpleton. And it goes on and on and on. And the place where it's the most important, I'm just going to read the next 5 lines and we're going to stop there. I knew both Brod and Horvir. They were the retainers of Hroth the Old, of Jormunrek's descendants, son-in-law to Sigurd. Listen to my account of the man fierce of enemies who slew Fafnir. He was a prince descended from Volsung. Okay, so now we get into a very famous hero. Sigurd was the dragon slayer who slew Fafnir the dragon. He's a direct, the Volsungs are the direct line of Odin. And Fafnir the dragon is where in England we get the St. George's Day, the slaying of the dragon, which has been sort of, what's the word, supplanted by the Christian St. George, but it was Sigurd. And he slew the dragon, and the Saxons, when they arrived in England, had the white dragon flying on a red background, which is actually the true flag of England, but we are not allowed to fly that because people find it offensive. Even though they can have a red flag in a red dragon in Wales, the white Saxon dragon is not seen as acceptable. And I think that's a shame because there are many prophecies and legends based around the red and white dragons. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you found it interesting and not too boring. I hope to see you again next time on The Voice of Odin. Bless you all.